To those who identify as initiates, lightworkers, spiritual seekers, and those deeply committed to their spiritual journey, this message is for you. If you have been walking the path of spiritual growth, this will challenge what you might consider the common spiritual ego and bring awareness to the illusion of enlightenment that many fall prey to. Too often, in spiritual circles, we find ourselves drawn to titles, labels, and external markers of spiritual progress. We equate progress with performance, identifying as enlightened, awakened, or in alignment, without truly understanding the depths of what these terms mean. This message seeks to reveal how spiritual inflation, the tendency to inflate our sense of self and spiritual identity, can block the true initiation process and obstruct the understanding of our real, authentic purpose. Spiritual inflation, while it may appear as a sign of growth, is in reality a powerful obstacle on the path to deeper truth. I became enamored with the idea of being enlightened, believing that my ability to discuss esoteric subjects, my growing knowledge of spiritual texts, and my perceived progress in my spiritual practices elevated me above others. It's a subtle trap, but one that is dangerously alluring. Spiritual ego creates a false narrative, one where we believe our practices or experiences automatically make us better, more awakened, or more pure than others. In reality, this inflated sense of self-worth prevents us from doing the deeper, more uncomfortable work that true ascension requires. When we engage in spiritual performance, we risk losing sight of the very essence of spirituality, which is about authentic transformation. Instead of walking the path of inner growth, we find ourselves acting the part, just as an actor dons a costume to play a role. We wear the title of spiritual seeker or light worker. But in truth, we are not doing the real work, peeling back our layers, confronting our shadows, and healing the wounded aspects of ourselves. Spirituality, when reduced to performance, becomes a mask, a way to avoid the very transformation that our souls are calling for. My shift in understanding came when I was confronted by Sophia, the Gnostic figure of wisdom. Sophia appeared not as a physical being, but as a symbolic presence, a deep, profound awareness that shook me to my core. Her energy was raw, unapologetically wise, and deeply compassionate, yet it carried a powerful message. I had been using my spiritual practices as a way to avoid doing the real work. She revealed that the sense of enlightenment I had attained was, in fact, a clever distraction, a way of sidestepping the hard, painful work of self-exploration and emotional healing. Sophia made me see that my spiritual practices had become a form of ego reinforcement. I wasn't engaging in meditation or fasting to heal, grow, or align with my higher self. I was doing them to feel special, to feel better than, to confirm my own self-constructed identity as someone on a higher path. The idea that I had transcended certain emotions, desires, or worldly attachments had become my crutch. It was easier to claim that I had moved beyond something than to face the discomfort of truly addressing it. Her confrontation forced me to dismantle my spiritual persona. I had to face the hard truth that, while I had undoubtedly accumulated knowledge and had experiences of heightened consciousness, I had not allowed myself to become truly vulnerable. I had not done the deep emotional work that spiritual awakening demands. I had been performing a role, not living the authentic experience of awakening. The process of self-deception was a defense mechanism, an attempt to protect myself from the pain that real transformation would require. But transformation was no longer optional. It was a necessity, and Sophia's wisdom was the catalyst for my awakening to this truth. The journey of spiritual awakening can easily be distorted by the desire to appear awakened or enlightened to others. This is where Ascension Cosplay, the act of pretending to be spiritually evolved, becomes dangerous. Spiritual ego can manifest in many ways, but the most common symptoms are performative actions, such as using advanced spiritual language or engaging in practices that outwardly suggest growth and enlightenment. You may find yourself discussing complex spiritual topics, quoting mystical teachers, or practicing meditation and visualization in a way that feels detached or mechanical. Instead of experiencing true connection and transformation, these practices become a show, a way of proving to yourself and others that you've arrived. In Ascension Cosplay, spiritual practices can become disconnected from their true purpose. Meditation may no longer feel like a genuine tool for inner peace and self-awareness, but instead becomes a means of checking off a box or appearing disciplined. Visualization, which should be about deep connection to your highest potential, may transform into a performance, a way of manipulating energy to achieve outward goals, without consideration for inner alignment or spiritual growth. The essence of these practices is lost, and you're left with the outer shell of spirituality, without the soul behind it. One of the most insidious aspects of spiritual ego is spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing occurs when someone uses spiritual language or practices to avoid dealing with their emotional or psychological issues. It's a way of using spirituality as a shield to cover up unresolved wounds, unprocessed emotions, or difficult truths about oneself. Instead of addressing feelings like anger, fear, or sadness, individuals may claim to have transcended them, making statements like, "I'm above that," or "I've forgiven them, so it no longer affects me." While it may sound spiritual on the surface, these statements are often a form of denial, masking deeper, unresolved issues. Spiritual bypassing also manifests in relationships. Some people stay in toxic or unhealthy relationships and justify their stay with the idea of spiritual detachment. They may rationalize abusive or manipulative behavior as part of the process, or claim that their spiritual practice allows them to rise above the dysfunction. In these cases, instead of confronting the underlying issues in the relationship, the person uses spiritual language as a way to avoid the necessary work of healing, boundary setting, and emotional growth. This behavior prevents true transformation from taking place. It creates a disconnect between one's spiritual identity and their lived reality. True spiritual growth requires that we face our inner shadows, not hide behind the notion that we've transcended them. Spiritual bypassing may offer temporary relief or protection, but it ultimately blocks us from accessing deeper layers of healing and awakening. The dangers of spiritual ego and Ascension Cosplay are real. They prevent us from engaging in the deep, uncomfortable work that true spiritual awakening demands. When spirituality becomes a performance, we miss out on the genuine transformation that comes from confronting our shadows, healing our emotional wounds, and letting go of our attachments to ego-based desires. The spiritual path is not about appearances or proving our worth to others. It is about authentic growth, humility, and facing the truth of who we are. True enlightenment is not about transcending the human experience, but rather about embracing it with awareness, vulnerability, and compassion. It requires us to be honest with ourselves, to shed the layers of illusion and ego, and to confront the parts of us that are uncomfortable or painful. Only through this process can we experience the true freedom, peace, and clarity that true spiritual awakening offers. The journey is not about being better than others. It's about being real, raw, and aligned with our higher self. The ego may try to deceive us, but the true path is one of authenticity and humility. Only when we release the need for spiritual performance and embrace our full humanity can we step into the true power of spiritual enlightenment. In ancient spiritual traditions, real initiation was not about obtaining accolades or being hailed as special. It was about deep transformation and confronting the shadows within. Initiates were put through a series of trials and spiritual tests designed to strip away the ego and bring them face to face with their truest self. This process was anything but comfortable. It demanded courage, humility, and a willingness to endure hardship. Real initiation required the symbolic death of the ego, an experience that challenged the very core of one's identity. It wasn't about feeling superior, spiritual, or enlightened. It was about undergoing intense, sometimes painful inner work that led to true self-awareness and alignment with the divine. This process, rooted in ancient wisdom, is at odds with the modern conception of spiritual progress, which often centers on the idea of spiritual inflation. In today's world, many people seek out spiritual experiences or practices in search of validation, seeking to prove their worth or spiritual superiority. This spiritual inflation often manifests as performance, where people present an image of themselves as enlightened, as if their external practices or knowledge alone make them special or superior. Spiritual practices are treated as tools for self-enhancement rather than methods for deep personal transformation. The true work of initiation, however, involves uncomfortable confrontation with one's flaws, limitations, and ego-driven desires. It requires honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to embrace the unknown within. Real initiation was never about the attainment of accolades or titles. It wasn't about receiving applause from others or showing off how much one had transcended the mundane world. Instead, initiation was about humility and the internal trials that brought one closer to truth. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of spiritual superiority or feeling above others because we've had experiences in meditation, healing, or other practices that have given us moments of peace, insight, or connection. But what if I told you that this spiritual inflation, the ego that masquerades as enlightenment, might be preventing you from taking the next step on your journey? The very thing that you believe makes you spiritually advanced may actually be holding you back from the deep work that leads to true alignment, initiation, and fulfillment of your real purpose. I know, as you read this, a certain defensiveness might arise. It's natural. Many spiritual seekers find comfort in the idea that they've arrived or have gained some level of understanding that sets them apart from others. But this defensiveness is, in itself, a sign of spiritual ego. It's an automatic reaction that is not rooted in the soul, but in the ego's need for validation, recognition, and safety. In many ancient cultures, initiates were not treated as privileged individuals. Instead, they were seen as humble seekers who would go through intense trials to earn their place in the spiritual community. This process involved stripping away the illusions of the ego, undergoing intense inner purification, and confronting parts of the self that most people are too afraid to face. Unfortunately, modern spirituality has often commodified the process of initiation. Spiritual experiences, whether it be workshops, retreats, or the acquisition of new spiritual knowledge, are marketed as something to be consumed. The practice of initiation has become a product, something you can buy or experience in a weekend seminar, or something that promises enlightenment or special powers without the real work. This commodification has turned the process of deep spiritual transformation into something superficial, easily obtained, and devoid of the rigorous and life-altering challenges that true initiation demands. True initiation is not a weekend experience. It is a lifelong journey of confronting your shadows, facing your deepest fears, and learning to live in alignment with a higher purpose. In the speaker's experience, the wisdom of Sophia, often depicted in Gnostic traditions as the embodiment of divine wisdom, played a central role in revealing the truth of their spiritual journey. Sophia's wisdom is not soft or accommodating. It is fierce, confrontational, and demands self-awareness. When Sophia entered the speaker's life, her presence was not about offering comfort or affirmation. It was about exposing the ways in which they had deceived themselves and how their spiritual practices had been used to hide from the real work of transformation. Sophia does not care about appearances or how spiritual someone seems to be. She is interested in uncovering the truth, and she does not shy away from revealing the performative nature of spirituality. She showed the speaker how much of their spiritual identity had been constructed out of ego, how they had built a persona that they believed was authentic, but in reality, it was a mask they wore to protect themselves from confronting their shadows. Through Sophia's wisdom, the speaker was able to see where their spiritual journey had become distorted, where they had turned their path into a performance rather than a process of true inner growth. Sophia's role in the speaker's life was transformative, pushing them to dismantle the persona they had built around their spiritual identity and face the discomfort of real transformation. Through her guidance, the speaker was shown that true spiritual awakening could not be achieved through external practices alone. It required the courage to face the darkest parts of themselves, to peel back the layers of illusion, and to allow for the painful but necessary work of self-realization. One of the greatest dangers of modern spirituality is spiritual bypassing, the act of using spiritual language, practices, or concepts as a shield to avoid dealing with difficult emotions, psychological wounds, or unaddressed traumas. Spiritual bypassing allows individuals to ignore or suppress their shadows, masking their true emotional state with spiritually sanitized explanations. For example, someone may feel deep anger or resentment, but claim to have transcended these emotions because they have learned to meditate or practice detachment. In reality, these unresolved emotions are simply being buried under the surface, preventing true healing from taking place. Spiritual bypassing is a subtle form of spiritual performance. It's about presenting a polished, idealized version of oneself that aligns with spiritual ideals, rather than confronting the real, raw emotions that need to be healed. True initiation requires us to dive into these emotions, to confront our pain, our fears, and our inner contradictions. It is only through this confrontation that we can experience true spiritual growth and transformation. Ignoring these difficult aspects or masking them with spiritual jargon keeps us from doing the necessary work that leads to genuine spiritual awakening. Real initiation is not a performance. It's a transformative process that challenges us to confront our shadows, embrace our vulnerabilities, and strip away the illusions we've created about ourselves. The path of true spiritual growth is not glamorous, and it does not promise an easy or smooth journey, but it is a journey that leads to profound wisdom, deep inner peace, and alignment with a higher purpose. The lessons we learn through confronting our shadows are the building blocks of true spiritual enlightenment. These lessons are not about being better than others or achieving an idealized state. They are about becoming more authentic, more humble, and more aligned with the divine truth within us. Spiritual ego and Ascension Cosplay are traps that keep us from accessing the true essence of our spiritual path. By using spiritual practices as a performance, or by bypassing the real work required for transformation, we block ourselves from experiencing the deep healing and growth that initiation offers. Sophia's wisdom is a reminder that true spiritual awakening requires us to confront our shadows, embrace our inner truth, and let go of the illusions we've created. Only then can we experience the real work of initiation, the kind of transformation that leads to authentic spiritual enlightenment and alignment with our higher purpose. For many years, I lived under the illusion that I was spiritually advanced. I engaged in various practices, adopted spiritual titles, and embraced a persona that I believed reflected my inner growth. However, when I confronted the performative aspects of my spiritual path, I had to face a deeply uncomfortable truth. Much of what I had built was rooted in ego. My spirituality, rather than being a path of deep transformation, had become an identity to uphold, a performance I put on for myself and others. This realization led to a period of collapse, of questioning everything I had come to believe about myself and my purpose. I was forced to dismantle the spiritual persona I had carefully crafted over the years. The titles I had embraced, such as Lightworker or Initiate, no longer held meaning. They were just labels, illusions that kept me trapped in a cycle of spiritual materialism, where my worth was measured by what I did, who I appeared to be, and how much spiritual knowledge I accumulated. This collapse was painful, as it meant letting go of the very foundation I had built my identity on. But in that emptiness, I found the space for true spiritual growth. The dismantling of my spiritual persona was not the end. It was the beginning of a more authentic path to wisdom. Real gnosis, true spiritual knowledge, is not about accumulating facts, titles, or experiences. It is about direct, transformative experiences that lead to a deeper understanding of both oneself and the universe. Knowledge that comes from books or teachings is useful, but it is not enough. True gnosis is something you embody. It is the lived experience of wisdom. This wisdom dismantles the false identities we construct for ourselves, exposing the ego's need for validation. Real spiritual awakening leads to humility, not arrogance. It brings you closer to understanding your own limitations and the vastness of the universe, rather than making you feel superior or separate from others. Spiritual materialism, the desire to collect experiences, titles, and accolades in the name of spirituality, is a dangerous trap. It keeps you chasing after external symbols of enlightenment, rather than living the truth of what you have learned. True gnosis does not inflate the ego, it deflates it. It teaches you to relinquish control and embrace the mystery of life without needing to own it or prove anything to anyone. The wisdom gained from real gnosis doesn't make you a better person in the eyes of others. It deepens your relationship with yourself and the divine. One of the most significant illusions that spiritual ego creates is the attachment to labels like Lightworker, Healer, or Enlightened. These titles are not inherently bad, but when they become a source of identity, they trap you in the illusion of superiority and separation. The moment you identify as a light worker, for instance, you begin to place yourself above others who don't share the same title or path. This creates a sense of division, when the true essence of spirituality is about unity, oneness, and humility. Real spirituality is not about accumulating titles or recognition. It is about shedding these identities and embracing your true nature. The more you cling to labels, the more you separate yourself from the essence of who you really are. Spiritual growth requires letting go of these outward markers of success or spiritual achievement and embracing the simplicity of being. The true work is not about becoming someone you're not. It's about shedding the illusions of who you thought you were and allowing your true self to emerge in its raw, unpolished form. And what happens when we are defensive in response to challenges to our belief systems? We avoid the deeper shadow work required for real spiritual growth. This defensiveness is a veil, a protective shield the ego uses to prevent itself from facing the real work it must do. True spiritual initiation involves dismantling the false self, confronting our shadows, and embracing the raw and often uncomfortable truth about ourselves. Yet, if we hold tightly to spiritual ego, we block this process of initiation. We maintain a performative spiritual identity, rather than allowing ourselves to become fully integrated with the truth of who we really are, beyond the labels and images we've constructed. It is in this gap between the illusion of enlightenment and the truth of what we are avoiding that we remain stuck, unable to grow. The experience of spiritual inflation often comes when we are most attached to our external practices and appearances. One of the most difficult challenges in the spiritual journey is confronting the fear of being ordinary. Many of us are conditioned to believe that true spiritual enlightenment requires us to be extraordinary, different, or somehow set apart from others. We are taught to seek transcendence, to rise above the mundane aspects of life, and to cultivate a sense of superiority over the ordinary world. But the truth is, spiritual awakening is not about becoming extraordinary. It's about embracing the ordinary. The real work of initiation is about accepting your humanity fully, without the need to transcend it. You do not need to escape the world to experience enlightenment. You need to embrace it in its fullness. Spiritual transformation happens not when we try to distance ourselves from the world, but when we learn to be fully present in it, accepting ourselves and others without judgment. The fear of being ordinary often arises from the ego's need for validation. We seek external recognition, wanting to be seen as special or elevated. But real transformation happens when we let go of these desires and learn to live fully in the present moment. True spiritual maturity is not about achieving something outside of ourselves. It is about embracing our humanity and finding the divine in the here and now. True spiritual transformation is not about performing rituals, achieving milestones, or impressing others with our knowledge or experiences. It is about presence, the ability to be fully present in the moment, fully accepting ourselves without the need for performance or validation. Spiritual growth is not something we attain or acquire. It is something we embody. When we let go of the need to prove anything to ourselves or others, we open ourselves to true spiritual maturity. We stop looking for external validation and begin to find peace and fulfillment in simply being. This doesn't mean we stop striving for personal growth, but it does mean that we stop attaching our worth to our achievements or titles. We learn to live authentically, without the need to perform for the world or for our own ego. True spirituality is about embracing our real selves, imperfections and all, and living with an open heart and mind. It is about shedding the layers of illusion, confronting our shadows, and stepping into our divine essence without fear or pride. The journey is not about becoming someone else or attaining a title. It's about becoming who we truly are, right here and right now, in the fullness of our being. Only when we embrace the present moment and let go of our spiritual ego can we experience true transformation and wisdom. As we close, I invite you to engage in true initiation, the kind that requires letting go of the performative aspects of spirituality. True initiation is not about impressing others with what you know, the practices you do, or the titles you've acquired. It's about facing the parts of yourself that you've avoided and confronting the shadows that still linger within. True spiritual initiation begins with the courage to strip away the layers of illusion and ego and to stand in your authentic self, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be. It's time to move beyond the external performances of spirituality and embrace the deep inner work that leads to true transformation. The real challenge on this path is to stop performing spirituality and begin living it authentically. It's about shedding the masks and identities that we've used to define ourselves spiritually and confronting the parts of ourselves that are difficult to face. Too many of us cling to spiritual identities, titles like lightworker, healer, or enlightened, believing that these titles validate our worth and spiritual progress. But the truth is, Real spirituality doesn't need external validation. It needs internal authenticity. The path of true spiritual growth is not about performing for others or seeking approval. It's about living in alignment with your deepest truth, whether anyone sees it or not. Embrace your true self, even if it means letting go of the image you've built, and focus on the real work of transformation. True spiritual growth requires humility, and humility requires honesty with yourself. Real spiritual growth comes from embracing humility. It requires the courage to ask yourself the difficult questions and to confront the parts of you that are uncomfortable. Humility isn't about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking of yourself less and recognizing that the journey is about evolving and growing, not proving something to the world. To step into true spiritual maturity, you must confront your spiritual ego, the part of you that wants to look good, be seen as advanced, and receive accolades for your practices. True spiritual growth requires vulnerability, a willingness to feel the discomfort of truth, and the honesty to admit when you are using spirituality as a shield to avoid the hard work of personal growth. As we wrap up, I challenge you to reflect on the signs of Ascension Cosplay in your own life. Are you using spirituality as a mask to avoid your shadows, to cover up your insecurities, or to present an image of yourself that isn't aligned with who you truly are? It's time to do the hard work of self-inquiry and confront the parts of you that have been hiding behind spiritual performances. Only through honest self-reflection and the discomfort of truth can true transformation occur. Stop using spirituality as a way to feel special or validated. Embrace it for what it truly is, a path of self-discovery, vulnerability, and growth. It's time to step into your real, unmasked self and walk the path of authenticity. Spiritual inflation blocks us from seeing the fullness of who we are, and the need for validation only keeps us from stepping into our real purpose. This message challenges you to move beyond the false sense of security that comes with spiritual ego and embrace the deeper, sometimes uncomfortable work of true self-awareness. It is through this process that you will unlock the next level of your spiritual evolution. Now is the time to release the masks, drop the performative aspects, and step into the raw, authentic truth of who you are meant to be. True initiation comes not from the spiritual ego, but from the willingness to let go, confront your shadows, and embrace the journey ahead. The real purpose of your soul is calling, and it's time for you to answer. At some point in every spiritual seeker's journey, the line between true awakening and spiritual performance becomes blurred. I can speak to this from my own experience. There was a time when I wore my spirituality like a costume, performing rituals, reciting mantras, and engaging in practices that seemed to promise enlightenment, without truly diving into the depths of transformation. I believed that because I meditated deeply, fasted regularly, and experienced occasional visions, I was on a higher level of consciousness. I believed that these practices, when done just right, were the gateway to transcendence, to spiritual superiority. But in truth, what I was really doing was engaging in what I now call Ascension Cosplay, a performance of spirituality that was more about appearance than actual inner work. Spiritual ego often disguises itself as light, wisdom, and higher consciousness, and I was no stranger to this illusion.